Please welcome to the stage, Neal Anderson.
Morning, folks. I'm going to talk today about a very personal journey that I went on around the whole need to decarbonize our energy mix. And it also then impacts on the great company that is Wood Mackenzie, the company that I lead, in terms of how we think about that and how it impacts on our business. But before I get into that, I'd just like to give you a little bit more context, thanks to Holly, just a little bit more flavor. I started out as an exploration geologist 27 years ago. I wasn't much of an exploration geologist, I can safely say. I did not discover any oil and gas to add into the whole legacy mix. But I'm born and bred in fossil fuels, born and bred in the oil and gas business, okay? As indeed is the legacy of Wood Mackenzie, the great company that I lead. We started off in the North Sea looking at fossil fuels. So just as all you folks are thinking about the challenge of the energy transition, so have we at Wood Mackenzie. Okay, so this is very much that personal story from my perspective and also the company's perspective. First thing that I want to do is I want to state the obvious. Energy has been absolutely critical to the growth of the global economy over the last century. We should not apologize for that in terms of the folks in the fossil fuels business. It's been absolutely critical lifting millions of people out of poverty. And we've always made the argument that fossil fuels are relatively cheap, accessible, and reliable. Okay, and I'll come back to those three things as we walk through this conversation. However, over the last decade, with advancements in science, in terms of the challenge that we have with climate change, the role that burning fossil fuels have in that climate change, generating greenhouse gases, particularly CO2, we also have to be open to that, and we have to realize the impact that our business is having on that. And this impact is pretty profound. 3 or 4 of the colleagues in Wood Mackenzie helped me pull together these slides. I asked them what personally that impact of climate change had on them. And one gentleman called MJ had a really interesting viewpoint in terms of the impact that climate change is having on the oceans and in terms of bleaching coral reefs. He felt that was really important to him as an active scuba diver, and he saw it's happening today, Neal, was his quote. As you may have guessed by my East Texas accent, I've lived in Houston for the last 14 years. I've had Hurricane Rita, Ike, and just last September I had Harvey. And there's either something fundamentally wrong with our stats, or we are going through a change in weather patterns, because we have had 3 100-year floods in the last 3 years, folks. So you understand my background, you understand fossil fuels background, and my attitude has always been, of course there's going to be an energy transition, just as we move from burning wood, biomass, to coal, to oil. Of course there's going to be an energy transition. And it's going to take 10, 20, 30 years to happen. Problem with that argument, folks, is I've been in this business coming on 30 years. We can't keep saying pushing it to the right, pushing it to the right. And the chart that we have here on the left was the chart that really had the biggest impact on me personally. And it's simply looking at the global investment in renewables in comparison with global investment in upstream. And yes, there are caveats to this. Yes, we had the oil price crash. Yes, investment has declined in the upstream side. But just looking at that chart, it's approaching 3/4 of the global investment in upstream. So the key thing that I want to get across here is this is happening. The energy transition isn't 5 years out, 10 years out. It's happening today. So to make it specific for Wood Mackenzie, how did we think about this and how did we respond? We advise clients about energy matters. We needed to have a view on the energy transition. So we bought a company called Green Tech Media out of Boston who covers solar, smart grid, and storage. And we bought a company called Make out of Denmark who cover wind. Because we need to get serious about this, and we need to have a view and a perspective on it, both for our traditional clients and our new clients. I'll come back to the three things that we talked about before. Fossil fuels have been relatively cheap, reliable, and accessible, which we have over the last century. So yeah, Neal, I hear you about the whole renewables piece. Yeah, but it's not really cheap. It really needs subsidies, doesn't it, Neal? If you look at the chart on the left, this is looking at the levelized cost of electricity generation from solar. The diameter of the bubble is essentially the size of the project. And you can see the dramatic decline in costs over the last 4 or 5 years. So are there areas where solar does not need subsidies? The chart on the right is looking at wind projects. And if you see right at the very side there in 2017 and 18, you will see there's even projects that do not need subsidies. Okay, they haven't been built just yet. They're being developed in Northwest Europe. But that's also coming through as well in terms of how competitive solar and wind are. They're certainly competitive against coal, and they're getting close in terms of competitive against gas. Yeah. Fossil fuels were cheap. Renewables need subsidies. Well, yeah, not really. Second one I want to tackle is reliability. And I don't know if you folks are familiar with the situation in Southern Australia. They have a lot of renewables in their generation portfolio, and they were having brownouts. And us folks in the fossil fuel lobby had a little bit of a cackle and a laugh about this. Well, obviously, because you only generate when the sun shines or the wind blows, and look at how they've exposed their overall grid to this unreliability. Elon Musk and the folks got together with a utility and they built a world-class scale storage facility which manages those brownouts, and it actually allows you to do some arbitrage in terms of the power grid. Third one that I want to talk about is accessibility. Island communities, at the minute, they're typically burning diesel. It's not environmentally friendly. It's also very expensive. This is looking at the combination of solar with storage, how it can even out the load, and how it can be cost competitive. As indeed can LNG be if you look at the chart to the right. Key thing here we've talked about, needs subsidies? Not really. It's not really reliable. We're getting there with world-scale industrial-sized storage. Accessible is a really interesting one as well. Wood Mackenzie is a proud sponsor of a charity out of the UK called Energy for Impact. And they work with sub-Saharan communities to try and get them access to energy. So it's essentially a model of a solar panel, some storage, and then they can actually start to drive and help these folks lift them out of poverty. You imagine how that model could play through with energy in general. We always talk about the energy transition. You're going to have a lot of stranded infrastructure assets. Are you going to have to build brand new infrastructure assets to give people access to energy? With that model, you're totally off grid. Totally upends your entire business. And I think it's a little bit akin to the wave of access to telephones in Africa. Because we had the same sort of mindset 10 years ago in terms of we needed to build a lot of infrastructure and fixed lines. And the advent of cellular has just bypassed all of that. Could we do the same thing here with solar and storage? As we talked about, I've been in the business 27 years, and Wood Mackenzie's got really serious about the whole decarbonisation piece. And we've been talking to clients, traditional oil and gas clients, about this. And we're getting some traction over the last couple of years with the European majors. Up until very, very recently, we're getting limited traction from folks in North America. Up until about probably the last 6, 12 months. And there's lots of interest about, Neal, how should I be thinking about this energy transition? What does it mean for my business? And that's being driven 100% from investors. So this slide is just simply trying to illustrate how investor lobbying, its impact on the business, and how they're starting to have to think about the business, okay? So I've made the point that the energy transition isn't 5 years out, 10 years out, it's happening today. And the folks in the oil and gas business have to think about it seriously, because you're already under pressure from your investors to think about it seriously. So what are the oil and gas companies doing about it? And if we look at the European companies, they're looking very seriously at things like solar and wind. So if you take a company like Statoil, they have looked at how they can bring their competency in offshore installations to see, could they apply that to offshore wind? You look at companies like Total and Shell, who have a relationship with end user clients in terms of retail gasoline, and they're trying to leverage off those relationships to sell them residential power packages. You then look more at the North America folks. They're looking at it from more of a carbon sequestration position, and they're also looking at the biofuels piece. And the rationale there is, when you look at challenges that we have in terms of aviation fuel, can we replace that with solar? How would that work? Would we have efficient storage? That's how they're thinking about the business. Caveat on all of this is the investment, as you can see in the chart to the right, is pretty small, circa $1 billion each year for each of these super majors, with the exception of Total. And they're really challenged about how they think about this and how can they start to generate equivalent returns that they would get in their core business. Because it's far from easy. It's, in terms of, yes, they need to be thinking about the energy transition. Yes, they need to be thinking seriously about solar, wind, etc. Flip side is there are challenges in terms of those returns. I want to have a little bit of fun here in terms of how this could all play out. So let's go back to that example we talked about, energy for impact. And let's imagine that that could play out right across the Western world. And what I mean by that is, I go back to Houston on Friday morning. I drive in my Tesla into my house. I've got my solar panels on my roof, and I've got a large-scale storage battery pack in my garage. And essentially what's happening is the solar is charging the storage. Then when I need that during the evening, it's giving me the power that I need for my home, and then I can recharge my EV. What role would a major oil and gas company play in that scenario? Candidly, I'm not sure, because certainly there's the manufacturers of the EVs, there's the manufacturers of the solar and the storage. Is that typically a major oil and gas company thing? Not sure. There's certainly installation and maintenance, but that's almost like selling white goods. That's like a Sears. So how does that work for a Shell, a BP, or an Exxon? If that were to happen, that utopia view were to happen, how do they position themselves for that? Other end member is a little bit akin to where we are today, where there's lots of really interesting technologies out there, but it's a little bit of fits and starts. There's a little bit of concern about lithium-ion storage. There's a little bit of concern where you're getting the cobalt and the lithium from. There's concerns about recycling. There's concerns about the efficiencies of that storage. So it's a little bit akin to what we have today, only stretching out over the next 5, 10 years. There's certainly a role for oil and gas companies in that. Okay? You know, we at Wood Mackenzie are predicting a peak demand in oil around 2027. And then it plateaus. And the reason it plateaus is because of the need for other things that oil and gas feeds, be it plastics. I was in the UK last week, and I was with some friends, and I had the cheek to ask for a plastic straw. I didn't realize this David Attenborough Blue Planet. Have you seen Blue Planet 2? And you've seen the whole issue with plastics. So is that scenario of the oil and gas business, well, maybe we'll lose a little bit in transportation, but actually we'll still need it for plastics, etc. Does that undermine that argument? Because there's certainly a groundswell of opinion going around that. What is probably a more likely scenario is a fudge between the two that I've outlined, those two scenarios that I've outlined. And again, oil and gas companies will really have to think carefully about how they position themselves for that. You know, and a more optimistic assessment of it is oil companies are really, really good at developing new technology and deploying that at a massive global scale. Could that help with this opportunity of threat scenario? Could they position themselves for that? So I've walked through my own personal journey in terms of decarbonization. I don't think we have a choice. We have to decarbonize our energy sources. I also think it's a phenomenal opportunity for companies like Wood Mackenzie because we have to help people on that journey and on that transition. But it raises some really fundamental issues for the wider business. Infrastructure we talked about. The amount of sunk cost on our existing hydrocarbon infrastructure globally is enormous. It's into trillions of dollars. How do we think about that? How can we utilize that? And that's all the thinking around carbon sequestration. Can we take the carbon out of these things? Or can we leapfrog all of that? An example I give you for energy for impact. Can we have that utopian model where we leapfrog all that need for those fixed costs and infrastructure? Energy access is a fundamental human right. So what do we need to do to try and help and facilitate that? How do we deploy our capital? We talked about the majors and we talked about they're only investing circa $1 billion a year on the whole renewables piece. But their real challenge is, where do you place your bets? Where can I get a decent return for that business? What do the major resource holding countries do? How do the Saudi Arabias, the Kuwaits, the UAEs of this world, the Venezuelas of this world, how do they think about this energy transition? And you can see things already happening in terms of the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, how he's trying to think about how does he evolve his economy and the mix of his economy to try and address this. But there are fundamental issues there as well, and there are lots of instability that could trigger from that. So, you know, we at Wood Mackenzie have looked at this, and it's certainly a challenge. And we're trying to turn that challenge into an opportunity for us and for our clients. But we're going to have to take a very, very, very holistic and flexible approach to all of this. And we're going to have to encourage lots of other folks with lots of different views and opinions to contribute and be part of this debate. Because it's absolutely fundamental to where we are and where we're going to go as a global group. You know, sitting for 5 days, day and night, listening to torrential rain with Hurricane Harvey, there is no doubt in my mind that the climate's going through a fundamental change. And this is, speaking as a geologist, who's well aware of the Ice Age 10,000 years ago and other climatic events, this is happening today and we need to do something about it. So thank you, folks.